Hi there. Today we have Wendie Legee, and I want to give a quick biography for Wendie. Wendie got her, she won't say exactly when, but she got her Bachelor's of Arts in Corrections from Western Oregon University. After college, she started working as a community work crew supervisor with Marion County Adult Community Corrections. Following that, she moved into the position of Parole and Probation Officer with the state of Oregon. And from there, she's gone federal as a U.S. Probation Officer for the District of Oregon. She started in that position in 1993. And since moving into the federal system, she's held a number of positions, doing things like writing pre-sentence reports, supervision officer, drug and alcohol treatment specialist, and a mental health specialist with the unit. So I want to welcome you, Wendie, and why don't we go ahead and get started. I wanted to start off today just asking you a little bit about your current position and duties. So what do you do?
Okay. Well, I'm a manager presently with the U.S. Probation Office in the District of Oregon. I've been doing that for about 8 years. But I think I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what it is that entry-level U.S. probation officers do, because I think that a lot of the students out there listening to the webinar are probably interested in that. For the most part, and this is not specific to the District of Oregon either, it's probably fairly common around the country, most entry-level officers will either be assigned as a pre-sentence investigator or a pre-sentence writer or a supervision officer. They share a lot of similar responsibilities and yet have a lot of different responsibilities. Pre-sentence writers, for the most part, obviously write pre-sentence reports, and essentially they collect data about an offender who has either pled guilty or been found guilty in federal court of a crime, and that information assists the court in essentially deciding upon a sentence for the particular defendant. So we go into, the writer investigates criminal history, the instant offense, personal history like employment, family data, education levels, there's a military background, and compiles all of this data together and then incorporates the federal sentencing guidelines and provides a pretty in-depth picture of the defendant before the judge the day of sentencing. Following sentencing, the offenders come out to the community and are supervised by our supervision officers, and they of course monitor the offender within the community to make sure they comply with conditions, and the officer assesses risks and makes referrals and those kinds of things. So that's essentially what the pre-sentence writers and supervision officers do entry level within the U.S. District Courts as a probation officer. So.
Okay. So can you tell me a little bit about how you got into this field and why you're doing this work?
Well, I fell into this field actually a little bit by accident. I wanted to be a teacher, and I think that one of the characteristics I think of a good probation officer is similar to some of the characteristics of a good teacher, and that is that you want to help people to really reach their full potential. So I wanted to look at that part of a potential career, being able to assist folks with being as best they can. And I happened to take a criminal justice class as an elective and just really took a keen interest in it and changed my major halfway through college. So I also, as I learned a little more about community-based corrections, I really liked the variety that came with being a probation officer. You are an investigator, you're also a social worker, you're a law enforcement officer, so you do so many different things as a probation officer, which essentially meant that it was never a dull moment. I was going to be doing something different and new essentially every day because people are different, and so that meant that my day was probably going to be changing almost hourly. So I kind of enjoyed that. I liked to do something a little different. Also, an internship really pushed me in the direction of probation. I was thinking, maybe law enforcement, possibly even corrections within a facility. But after doing an internship and really working with the offenders and the different populations of offenders in the field, that pretty much persuaded me that probation work was a better fit for me. So I started to look for positions after I had graduated wherein I was getting that exposure and that experience working with people. And sure enough, was hired on as a state probation officer, and it wasn't even until then that I learned of the existence of the U.S. Probation Office and knew the level of professionalism that came with working in the federal system, and ultimately applied for and kind of secured a position here. So that's kind of how I fell into the current position that I have now with the U.S. Probation Office. So.
Okay. I'm wondering if you can tell me about, a typical day for a probation officer in your agency. What would he or she be doing in this position?
Well, like I said, it's a plethora of duties and responsibilities, and of course, one given officer can do a lot of things in a day. First and foremost, we talk to a lot of people. So we conduct interviews with offenders, with offender family members. We have a lot of communications with attorneys, with the judge, with law enforcement agents, U.S. Attorney's Office. So we do a lot of interviews and have a lot of conversations in the course of a day with different folks. We spend a lot of time running background investigations, even not only as a pre-sentence writer, but even as a supervision officer with associates to make sure that these associates don't have records. And so we're constantly conducting background investigations. We do a lot of data analysis, especially the writers with respect to federal sentencing guidelines. So there's computations that with the guidelines that the officers need to do, and that would even apply to supervision officers when violations occur and someone is looking at a potential revocation. We have to also be sensitive to the fact that there are federal sentencing guidelines with those cases as well. We write a lot, and I'm sure that students out there probably are well aware that probation officers prepare many reports, violation reports, status reports. Sometimes they go to our court, sometimes they go to the U.S. Parole Commission, other probation offices. We keep chronological entries or notes, essentially, on any contacts related to an offender on supervision. So there's a lot of writing that's involved. And we also testify quite a bit. So we're in court, the writers, for sentencing hearings, and supervision officers for either status hearings or violation hearings. So we're in court a lot. And we also meet with some of the judges independently. The officers will want to come back. They'll want the officers to come back and staff cases prior to a hearing, and occasionally that will happen. We make a lot of referrals for services for offenders. So we will probably have a lot of contacts with treatment providers, with programs out there that provide job readiness or even employment services to offenders. So we make all kinds of social service referrals, and that's based on the needs of the offender. And then, of course, there's a lot of collaboration. So there's communication with those people that are working with the offenders, and hence also working with us to make sure that they are complying with conditions and are able to become a little more productive members of the community. So there's a lot of collaboration between people also. So a lot of talking and a lot of writing in the course of a day. So.
Well, that leads us nicely into the next question that I have. And what are some of the skill sets and knowledge that you think that entry-level employees need to have in order to do well in this field?
Definitely, I would suggest that students have very, very good writing and oral skills. Like I said, communication is a big part of what the officers do, either a supervision officer or a pre-sentence writer. Some of the other skills, multitasking, obviously, like I said, during the course of a day, you can find yourself doing many different things. So you have to be good with multitasking and prioritizing work. Obviously, you have to have a passion about wanting to help people, and you have to also be fair in your assessment of situations. We try to be very impartial and balanced when we're making decisions about offenders, keeping in mind, though, that ultimately the community safety is first and foremost. But that does require a lot of compassion and then also passion at the same time for what it is that you're doing and the people you're working with. I would probably guess that frankly, as much speech you can take. So I know that there's debating classes occasionally, or speech classes, and that's just to assist you with feeling a little more comfortable talking in front of large groups of people. We may be leading groups, certain treatment groups, and so we have to have an ability to be able to talk to groups of people. Also, of course, when you testify, generally you're testifying in an open court, and there tends to be an audience out there as well. So those are some additional skills that might be helpful if you're looking at a career ultimately in probation. So.
Okay. And for people that are interested in getting into this line of work and in this field, how do you go about finding a job in either probation at a county level or, in your case, at a federal level?
Well, each agency has a human resources either manager or director within the agency. I know that the U.S. probation offices around the country, a lot of them will post positions within usjobs.gov. Also, that they will advertise in local newspapers, which is what we do here as well. So sometimes contacting the U.S. probation office or the county probation office within your area or a student's area to find out if there are positions available is best. And of course, now with, most agencies having a website, they can go to the agency's website, and usually job position announcements will be posted there as well. So.
Okay. And what are the entry-level requirements for working in federal probation?
In the District of Oregon, we require a master's degree and 2 years minimum experience in the field as either a probation officer, a case manager, or something of similar nature. The degree can be in the administration of justice, corrections, social work, psychology, or one of the social sciences. We've had actually...
so is it a master's degree or a bachelor's
degree? It's a
bachelor's
degree here.
Okay.
Did I say master's?
Yeah,
I'm sorry about that. Bachelor's
okay.
degree here. Other districts around the country may require a master's degree, so keep in mind that the District of Arizona, for example, may require a master's, where the District of Oregon requires a bachelor's. So it's going to vary depending upon which U.S. probation office it is that you're applying with. And one would think, because it's a federal agency, that would be consistent nationwide, but it's not. It's up to each district to determine the minimum requirements, and we have the bachelor's with the 2 years paid experience. So also, while not required, certainly it is helpful because you're tested and interviewed prior to being hired within our district, that you have a knowledge of how a criminal case moves through the court system. You just have to have that basic understanding, because without that, you're probably not going to be in the best position to be able to articulate and support recommendations to the court. You just have to know how cases move through the judicial process and have that basic knowledge. You can consider a postgraduate degree. I know with some districts around the country, they will allow that as a substitute for the 2 years experience. So certainly a master's degree is encouraged in a lot of districts, and I think that that's probably true for a lot of the local community-based corrections agencies as well. And certainly if you have any skills in a second language, some other districts and even our district likes to see that as a skill, or certainly another that could be advantageous to some of the other districts when they're looking for filling positions, especially if there's a population of offenders in which that skill is something that's acquired or beneficial. And I know a lot of the southern districts look for bilingual applicants down south. So.
Okay. You mentioned that getting into federal probation here in Oregon requires pretty much 2 years of some kind of experience, paid experience. How would people go about getting that experience in order to be able to qualify?
Typically what we've seen from applicants in the past, they've worked with the county probation offices. They have been paid as temps, possibly with as probation assistants. Mm-hmm. And if you have any case management experience, meaning you worked with the offenders, helped make referrals, even if you've worked within a jail setting, provided that you also understand the referral process, did case management, help perhaps with transition programming, those kinds of things would be helpful. If you are a law enforcement officer, that may qualify you for your 2 years depending on what you did within the particular agency. If you're a road officer, maybe not so much so because there's not much in the way of case management that's there. It's not to say that you would be excluded, it just may not be something that perhaps would have you as a better candidate. So certainly case management, referrals, working with offenders in that capacity is probably most advantageous in our district anyway. So.
Okay. You had mentioned for yourself that your first entree point into this field was an internship. And I know that you've worked with a number of our interns from the campus program in the Criminology, Criminal Justice. I'm wondering if you can tell us how would a student go about getting an internship in federal probation? What's the process for doing that?
In our some of the U.S. probation offices don't have internship programs. Fortunately, our district does. We're very supportive of the program. We see the benefit to the students. And essentially, you could probably contact a receptionist, the general U.S. probation contact number within the district, and ask if there is an internship program within the agency. If so, there'll be a coordinator that they'll probably transfer you to, and I happen to be the coordinator for the District of Oregon's probation office. And we work in collaboration with, obviously, the university. We have agreements established with the university, so we know the requirements of the student as they're doing their internship, and they have an understanding of our minimum requirements as well. So it's a collaborative effort. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Obviously, as I mentioned, you've had experience dealing with some of our students and in the role of internships. And I'm wondering if you can just comment on the benefits from your perspective of having a higher education, having a degree when you're working in a field like this.
Sure. One of the things I've noticed about the students that come in who are in their junior, senior years, they are very skilled in recognizing that there is a potential need for a good work ethic. To be able to understand you need to be on time, that there's multitasking involved. And a lot of students who have extended educations or higher educations through a multitude of classes that they're participating in have to acquire those kinds of skills anyway. They have to be able to prioritize. They know they have tests. They know they have assignments. They have to multitask. And those are the same kinds of things that come in. Those skills come in handy with interns coming in and looking to do internships. And so we think that they have those kind of bare essential skills, so that when we're providing assignments to them, they're able to kind of take off with them and not have to mandate so much supervision. They can be pretty independent once they've been given some instructions. And that's what we have found, is that we haven't had to go back and repeat instructions to students time and time again, because they seem to understand it. They've been in that practice habit after having been in school for a few years. So that's definitely a benefit to us to have a student who's been involved and is an upperclassman within the universities. So.
Okay. Are there other skill sets or things that you're looking for in terms of internship students?
A lot of probation offices have a minimum cumulative GPA, and that's within the criteria, and we do have that at 2.75. And that again is because one, and this is probably true for a lot of interns within federal probation or pretrial services offices, is that we are very selective about who comes over and does an internship, because we realize we put a lot on the students. We essentially swear them in as sworn intern officers. It's a big to-do, frankly, within the agency, and then after an orientation, they're doing pretty much almost everything that our officers do, with the exception of writing a pre-sentence report and supervising a caseload themselves. But they sit in on office visits, they conduct background investigations or assist the officer with doing that, collecting the data, summarizing reports, writing reports, so that way by the time their internship has ended, they have a very good understanding of what being a probation officer entails and whether they're really up to doing that, to actually having a career in that field. And we've had some students who have said, I really don't think I can do this because I thought I can work with offender populations and I don't believe I can, or boy, there's a lot involved, this is a stressful job, there's a lot happening, and we'd rather students learn this before they are finished with their college education than after they start a job, essentially. So it's a great program. We really immerse the students in what it is the officers do, and we've received some really good feedback, and our program's evolving based on the students' feedback too. So it's something I highly, highly recommend to students seeking a career in probation or anything corrections or law enforcement related.
Yeah, and we certainly highly recommend that students do an internship too. It's a wonderful opportunity to get real applied experience, develop relationships, often leads to jobs for some of our students.
Absolutely.
Well, that ends the planned sessions of questions that we had put together in advance, and we want to now turn to some of the questions that the participants in this webinar can submit. Okay, the first question we have is a student is wondering if there's age restrictions in terms of getting into a job in this field.
With the U.S. Probation Office, there is actually, because we're considered federal law enforcement and hazardous duty. You have to start your first day of employment before you reach your 37th birthday. And that's because we are a mandatory out at age 57 because of our law enforcement designation, and you have to have 20 years in, obviously, before you can retire. So you do have to officially start your first day prior to your 37th birthday because of that, yes.
Okay. The next question that was submitted is asking about whether or not there's physical requirements. So do you have a physical abilities test that applicants have to pass in order to get hired?
Officers should be fit for duty. They do have to go through a medical examination and, of course, be found to be fit to perform the job. And then, of course, they have to pass that new officer training that I've talked about. Well, maybe I didn't. The new officers have a 6-week training that they have to pass. And that's actually in South Carolina. It's a 6-week course, and half of it's classroom and the other half is defensive tactics and firearms training. So they would need to be able to actually pass all of the requirements of that particular training. So you do need to be fit enough to at least pass that and subsequent trainings that we have during the course of your career. So yes. Okay.
All right. The next question is a very practical one. What is the job outlook for this field? Are there a lot of positions available, a bunch coming open? How does it look?
Well, the U.S. Probation Office in the District of Oregon isn't real large, actually. We probably have about 68 full-time staff district-wide, which means for the entire state. And I would venture to guess that we have approximately 36 U.S. probation officers within the District of Oregon. But we are growing, and it's because a lot of us are retiring, and fairly young at that. Also, of course, we are, since we're a federal agency, we are dependent on federal budget, and we, at times, if there are budget constraints because of continuing resolutions and whatnot, we're somewhat impacted. We are in the process of hiring actually now. A lot of agencies, U.S. probation agencies around the country are, and it is a growing field actually. It's just really dependent on budgets, of course, and it's budgets passed on the federal level and then also within local communities. So that's usually what may stall some hiring, but there's always attrition and there are always people retiring, and it seems like I think there's a lot of growth within the agency. I also think that with a lot of evidence-based practices or new ways of conducting business within corrections, that we'll probably see more community-based programs funded that may be related to probation services as well, because it's simply less expensive to program an offender in the community than it is to house them within a facility. And so I think that fact in and of itself will probably also lead to positions becoming available within community corrections in the future too. So.
Okay. One of the other current trends in community corrections is to have probation and parole officers more involved in the actual delivery of treatment services and counseling services. And I'm wondering if that's consistent with what's happening in the federal system. Do you see a kind of an increased opportunity for actually carrying out services and delivering services?
We do. I know on a local level with a lot of county or state probation offices, you will have a lot of officers trained in facilitating certain groups, either cognitive behavioral therapy, alcohol and drug treatment sessions. A lot of U.S. probation offices around the country do actually have their officers do that, and some of the officers are required to do that, and they rotate those positions throughout. In the District of Oregon, we haven't had that yet, but I believe at some point in the future, officers will probably be trained in facilitating those groups themselves as well. And that could be driven by budget. It used to be that we would pay vendors within the community to actually facilitate groups, and it is now, because of, again, of costs associated with that, something that we're looking at providing internally. So that's something that we probably will be moving to at some point in the future.
Okay. I always have students in my criminal behavior class every term that I teach it who are interested in criminal profiling, and I talk to them about the reality of only having maybe 10 jobs available across the whole country in that. And if they really want to understand offenders and how offenders think, and the best way to do that is to actually work with them in either a treatment capacity or in a probation capacity. You spend a lot more time with them and really get to understand how they think and the issues that come up for them.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. The next question has to do with whether or not the federal system that you work in deals with minors, juveniles, as well as adults, or there are two separate systems that handle that?
No, we actually do have some minors that are prosecuted. We don't see it very often because really the government doesn't like to bring minors into the federal system. But the government has prosecuted minors on rare occasion for bank robbery, for example, or other federal crimes. Bank robbery, you can't, because the bank is FDIC insured, the only place that crime could be prosecuted is within federal courts and not really within a state court system. So if the juvenile is going to be prosecuted for committing a bank robbery, it's going to happen in federal court. But it's not very common, it's not very frequent. I can probably count, and I've been in the federal system over 18 years, I probably count on 5 on five fingers, a hand, the number of students, or not students, I'm sorry, the number of juveniles that have come through the federal system. It's just something that doesn't occur very often. So.
Okay. You mentioned bank robbers. What are some of the other kinds of the most common offenders or cases that you deal with in the federal system?
There's a lot of drug possession and manufacturing and distribution. So drug charges are common in the federal system. Obviously, bank robbery. A lot, thanks to the internet, we have a lot of child pornography cases that are prosecuted in the federal system. So those are the most common. We have several white-collar crimes, fraud, for example, tax evasion. Illegal reentry is another popular crime that's prosecuted in the federal court systems. That probably comprises our system of most of the cases that we see, with smatterings of other types of federal cases as well. So.
Okay, all right. Can you talk a little bit more about the different career paths and options for people that go into probation as a field?
And I believe this is true to the county system, but probation services will have, because again we have such a diverse group of offender populations that we work with, many special needs. So what will happen is that even within a probation office, you will have specialized units or officers working with those specialized populations of offenders. So they'll be on county levels, you'll see domestic violence and DUI caseloads. So there's opportunities to work within specialized populations there. We have sex offender specialists. We've got, again, a white-collar financial specialist within our office. We have the WITSEC, which is the Witness Protection Program on the federal level, and we have an officer who works with those cases. So there's an opportunity to work with very diverse populations of offenders, and those are often specialized positions in the federal agencies. That means those are promotional opportunities for people. I was the mental health specialist, so I had a caseload of mental health offenders. That's another, and you hear about mental health courts and reentry courts. So there are all kinds of different opportunities within the probation system to work within, depending on populations of offenders and programs within each agency. So and that keeps you fresh, I think, with having an opportunity to kind of change things up a little bit. And that's one of the things I've appreciated about my career, is how diverse my career has been, even within the federal system, because I've had those opportunities to work in different positions within the agency.
Okay. One of the other common beliefs about the federal system is that you're going to get shipped anywhere, that you'll end up in North Dakota or somewhere back east, and you're going to have to move. Is that accurate?
Well, the nice thing about the U.S. Probation Office is that we don't work for the Department of Justice. We work for the U.S. courts. And since I'm an employee of the U.S. courts obviously I work within the District of Oregon, I'm not going to be shipped to another district, because that district has their own chief probation officer and their own requirements. So, and we don't move, even though we have 5 offices within the District of Oregon, the federal probation offices within the District of Oregon. We don't force our employees to move to a different location, because we're sensitive to the fact that someone has roots within their community, they have children in schools, or tied. And we haven't had to do that. I can't speak for other districts, but it's very, very uncommon that someone is made to relocate, because frankly, there's demand for these positions, and we can fill a position if something becomes available in another office. So we don't relocate people unless someone wants to move from one office to the other within Oregon. And there's an opening there, then of course we would support that. So
okay.
Yeah.
The next question goes back to the idea of being shipped off or moved. The individual is interested in knowing whether or not it's best, if you're going to try and move into the federal law enforcement system or federal probation, to be willing and flexible about moving to get a job in the first place.
Most definitely. We've had several officers essentially just want to be hired with a federal probation office, and they're willing to relocate in order for that to happen. and they've arrived in Oregon from Texas, and they've been here ever since. Some U.S. probation offices will look for a commitment of a couple of years. We haven't done that in our district. Maybe it's because we think that Oregon's such a great place to live. Nobody's going to want to leave here anytime soon.
Not while it's raining.
No, I was going to say, maybe not while it's raining, but yes, I certainly, especially with federal probation jobs, I would encourage somebody to look outside their immediate area. Working within the federal system is wonderful. It's the creme de la creme if you're going to look at probation services. And my thinking is that if the Western District of Washington is hiring and you live in the Northern District of California, certainly why not? Because you can get that experience. You may end up liking living in Seattle or wherever, and that's going to be quite appealing when there is a position in the U.S. Probation Office in California that perhaps you later want to apply with. So definitely, if you see a position available in another state and you're comfortable with relocating, I would encourage folks to apply in those districts outside their area.
Okay. All right. Well, Wendy, that's the last question that we have submitted by the participants in the webinar. I want to thank you very much for coming in today on what was a sunny day and now a rainy day to talk to us about this exciting area of work. And so thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you, everybody, for participating in this webinar.